Wyoming Territory, November 1881. The wind howled through the cottonwoods as the sun crawled toward the edge of the world, and Beatrice Dunning stood barefoot in the snow behind the barn, clutching her mother's old shawl and praying for a miracle she no longer believed in. She was set to be married by dawn, not to someone she loved, not even someone she chose. Albert Granger, a man twice her age with hands that smelled like whiskey and blood, had struck a deal with her uncle land and 5 head of cattle in exchange for Beatrice's hand. Beatrice had refused twice. The third time, Albert had shown her what refusing would cost. Now she was trapped. Her uncle had locked her in the root cellar that morning, but she'd slipped the bolt with a sliver of iron she'd been hiding for weeks. She had no plan, no horse, and no shoes. Just her dead father's knife in her pocket and a fire pit she had dug herself near the river where no one could see the smoke. The fire crackled low as she knelt beside it, teeth chattering, breath fogging in the cold night air. Her fingers curled around the hilt of the knife. If no one came, she would not go back. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats. Beatrice dropped flat, heart hammering. She pressed her cheek to the frozen ground, watching through the brush. A single rider. Not Albert. Not one of his men. This man rode alone, tall in the saddle, wrapped in a worn brown coat, his hat pulled low. His horse was a dark bay, strong but tired. He rode like someone who had seen too many miles and trusted too few people. She stayed hidden as he dismounted near the fire. He did not call out, just crouched, held his gloved hands close to the flames, and waited. After a minute, he said softly, "I know you're out there." Beatrice gripped her knife tighter. "I passed a man back on the trail, drunk and bragging to his friends about how he was marrying some girl come morning, whether she wanted it or not." He looked into the fire. "I do not believe in that kind of marriage." She stepped into the firelight slowly. "You a lawman?" "No," he said, looking up at her. His eyes were green, sharp as glass. "I just do not like seeing people forced into things." He stood. He was young, maybe 25, with sun-dark skin and a jaw that looked like it had taken a few punches. "Name's Yates Alder." "Beatrice Dunning," she said. His eyes flicked to her bare feet. "You need boots." "I need a way out." He nodded once. "Then we better get you one." She stared at him, unsure. "Why are you helping me?" Yates took off his coat, handed it to her. "Because no one helped my sister." Beatrice hesitated, then pulled the coat around her shoulders. It was still warm, smelled like dust and pine and something faintly clean. He stepped away, tending to his horse. "You got family?" "None that would help me." "You got somewhere to go?" "No." Yates looked over his shoulder. "Then you ride with me. Just until you're safe." She studied him. His words were simple, but his voice was steady. Not gentle, not soft, but solid. Like he meant what he said. "I have a knife," she said. "Good," he replied. "You might need it." They rode out just before midnight, Beatrice behind him on the saddle, arms around his waist, cheek pressed to his back. The night was cold but clear. The stars spilled over them like spilled salt. She did not speak, and neither did he. By dawn, they were 30 miles west, deep into land people rarely passed through unless they had reason. Yates built another fire, this one under a bluff near a creek still running despite the frost. He gave her hard bread and jerky, then sat across from her, cleaning his rifle. "You were shaking back there," he said. "I was not scared of you." "I did not think you were." She looked into the fire. "He would have killed me. Or worse." Yates nodded. "That kind of man always thinks he owns everything he touches." She looked up. "What happened to your sister?" "She died," he said. "Ran from a man like that." But she ran too late. Beatrice did not ask anything else. That night, she lay close to the fire, wrapped in his coat again. Yates sat nearby, watching the trees. "I do not know what happens now," she said. "You do not have to know yet," he replied. He did not come closer. Did not try to touch her. He just stayed near, quiet and solid, like someone who would stand between her and the dark. The next few days passed slow. They moved west, keeping to the hills and dry creeks, avoiding roads. Beatrice learned how to ride proper, how to shoot straight, how to keep a fire going with wetwood. She learned Yates had no family left, just a small cabin near the Wind River. He had left it behind months ago, looking for work, looking for peace. He never said much, but when he did, it mattered. She caught him watching her sometimes when she laughed, when she stood with her hands on her hips after lighting a stubborn fire, when she tied her hair back with a strip of leather because she did not have anything better. He never looked away fast. Just watched like he was remembering something good. One morning, as they packed their things, he handed her a pair of boots. "They are not new," he said, "but they will fit." She took them, surprised. "Where did you get these?" "Traded for them, back in Laramie." "You did not even know me then." "I thought I would." That night, she lit their fire while he tied the horses. She sat beside it, knees pulled to her chest, and when he joined her, they sat quiet for a long time. The fire popped. "I was ready to die," she said. "I know. But then you came. I know that too." She looked at him. "You changed everything." He met her eyes. "You changed me first." She reached for his hand under the blanket. He did not flinch, just laced his fingers through hers. "I do not want to run forever," she said. "You do not have to." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time since her father died, she felt safe. Neither of them moved as the fire burned low and the stars came out again, bright and endless above them. The high ridges east of South Pass were painted gold with lichen and wind, the land brittle underfoot and long-shadowed under the November sun. Yates led the horses along a dry wash where the cottonwoods had grown gnarled and low, their leaves gone, their trunks split by years of storms. Beatrice walked beside him, her new boots stiff, her lips cracked from the cold. They hadn't spoken much since breaking camp that morning. The silence wasn't uneasy, it felt like something they both needed. But as they stopped to water the horses at a shallow spring, Beatrice glanced toward him. "You ever plan on going back to that cabin of yours?" Yates knelt, dipping his hand into the icy flow. "Used to think I might. It's a good piece of land. South-facing, creek runs through it. But it's got ghosts." She crouched beside him. "What kind of ghosts?" "The kind you make yourself. Things you should have done. Things you didn't stop." Beatrice studied the water. "I don't think I'd mind ghosts. Least they're quiet." Yates looked at her, the lines at the corners of his eyes softening. "You'd change your mind come winter." They traveled until the light began to fade, then found shelter beneath a rock overhang near a stand of junipers. The wind had picked up again, humming through the branches in a low, steady moan. Yates set to gathering wood while Beatrice arranged their blankets in a windbreak of stones and brush. As she was laying out the bedrolls, she paused. "When was the last time you stayed in one place?" He didn't answer right away. Then, from behind her, 2 years back, there was a mining camp near Rawlins. "I stayed through the season. Told myself it was just for the pay." "Was it?" "No," he said. "There was a woman." Beatrice turned toward him. "Did you love her?" Yates tossed another branch onto the pile. "No, but I could have if things had been different." She didn't press. Instead, she picked up a flint and steel from his saddlebag and started the fire. Her hands had gotten quicker, more sure. When the flames caught and the warmth began to creep into their bones, she sat back against the rock, knees drawn up. "I don't know who I'm supposed to be now." "You're not supposed to be anything but alive." "That's not enough." Yates sat beside her, his rifle resting across his thighs. "You're learning how to live on your own terms. That's more than most get." The fire popped, sending a spark into the dark. She watched it fade. "He'll come looking." "I know. If he finds us, he won't," Yates said. "We'll be in Wind River country by tomorrow. He won't follow that far." Beatrice frowned. "Isn't that reservation land?" "Some, but not all. There's open range through the foothills. I know a Shoshone man near Bull Lake. He trades horses in the spring. Owes me a favor." She looked at him sideways. "You trust him." "I trust his wife more." That made her smile, faint and quick. Later, as the fire burned low, she leaned back, eyes closed. "I used to think I'd marry someone who kept bees." Yates raised an eyebrow. Bees. My father did. He said if you keep bees, you have to be patient. Gentle hands. Quiet voice. I thought that sounded like someone I could live beside. Yates shifted, brushing a cinder off his sleeve. You think I keep bees? No, she said. But you don't scare them off either. He didn't answer, and she didn't need him to. When she woke the next morning, the fire had been rebuilt and something hot steamed in a dented tin cup beside her. Yates was already saddling the horses, his breath fogging in the pale air. Beatrice sat up slowly, pulling the blanket tighter. Where'd you get coffee? Traded for it near Fort Washakie. Didn't think you liked the taste? I don't. But I missed the smell. He handed her a biscuit wrapped in cloth. We'll reach the basin by midday. After that, the land opens up. No place to hide. She sipped the coffee, watching him. I'm not looking to hide anymore. Yates met her gaze. Then ride beside me. Not behind. They mounted without another word, and when they left the shelter of the rocks, she pulled even with him on the trail. The snow had thinned in patches, revealing dry grass beneath. A hawk wheeled overhead, casting a swift shadow over the ridge before disappearing into the sky. They rode side by side, the sound of the horses' hooves steady and sure beneath them. There were no fences ahead, and no smoke rising from cabins. Just the long horizon and the promise of something not yet broken. By late afternoon, the land had stretched wide and open, nothing but sagebrush and scattered basalt outcrops rolling toward the Wind River foothills. The mountains stood distant and pale, their peaks faded by high clouds. Beatrice rode close enough to Yates that their knees brushed now and then as the horses picked their way along a shallow draw. Neither spoke for a while. She kept her eyes on the land ahead where the trail broke into a series of low ridges. Feels like the world's bigger than it used to be. It always was, Yates said. You just weren't shown it. Beatrice tugged her shawl tighter against the wind. How far's your friend? Half a day still. We'll camp near the cottonwoods up ahead. He runs stock near there in spring and sometimes leaves a cache. She glanced at him. You trust he won't have moved on? He's the type that doesn't waste a place that works. They reached the grove by dusk. The trees bent in a slight curve around a dry gully where snow had drifted in soft heaps. Yates dismounted first, stepping through the snow with a hunter's caution, checking the hollow by a fallen trunk. He pulled out a burlap sack and shook it beans, salt, a small pouch of tobacco. Beatrice watched from where she stood beside her horse. Feels like you've done this before. Not this exact thing, he said, but close enough. As the fire took, low and slow between two flat stones, she knelt beside him, her hands red from the cold but sure in their movements. She didn't ask what he was thinking, though his brow was drawn, and his jaw set tighter than it had been in days. She waited until he spoke first. There's a line out here, he said, breaking a stick in half and tossing it into the flames, between a man who's running and one who's going somewhere. Beatrice looked at him, her face lit by firelight. Which are you? I was running, he said, but lately I've thought more about building something than leaving it behind. She didn't answer right away. The wind had softened and the only sound was the hiss of sap in the firewood. Then she said, I don't know how to build anything. Not really. I can mend things, cook some, keep a garden alive if the soil's kind, but I've never started from nothing. Yates leaned back on his elbows. Starting from nothing's easier than starting from someone else's mess. Beatrice folded her hands in her lap. You think we'd manage? He turned his head slightly toward her. I think we already are. She watched the fire for a long moment. Then, without looking at him, when I was younger, I'd sit out on the porch with my father. He'd watch the sky and tell me what the clouds meant, if it'd rain, if the wind would shift. I asked him once how he knew, and he said, you listen long enough and the land'll speak. Yates reached out and nudged a coal into place. What's it saying now? That I'm not alone anymore, she said quietly. Neither of them moved. The fire cracked. The horses shifted somewhere beyond the trees. Eventually, Beatrice stood and stepped away, her boots crunching softly over snow. She stopped beneath the largest cottonwood, hand resting on the bark. The moon had risen faint and silver, just above the ridgeline. Yates joined her, his steps slow, careful. He didn't speak until he was beside her. "You thinking about what comes next?" "I'm trying not to be afraid of it," she said. He looked toward the horizon. "It'll take work. There'll be hard days. Bad ones. I know. But we'll be standing in the same place when they come." She turned to him, then not quickly, but with the steadiness of someone choosing her ground. "Yates." He met her eyes. "I want to be where you are. Not just now. Not just until he gives up looking. I want to stay." He didn't hesitate. "Then I'll build a life with you." Her breath caught just once, just enough to make her blink hard against the cold. He reached for her hand, and she gave it freely. His fingers were warm, calloused, real. Neither leaned forward. Neither reached for more than what was already between them. But something shifted then, settled. Not a promise made in words, but one written into the space between their hands. They walked back to camp together, where the fire had burned low and steady, and the night stretched quiet and unbroken around them. The wind shifted before dawn, carrying the scent of pine resin and mule sweat from somewhere down the basin. Yates was already crouched near the fire, stirring the last of the beans in the pot, when Beatrice stepped from under the cottonwoods, her boots leaving shallow prints in the frost-hardened dirt. She'd slept lightly, the nearness of him more settling than the blankets had been. "There's movement out east," he said without looking up. "How many?" "2 riders. Slow pace. Could be trappers. Could be worse." Beatrice crouched beside him. "You think it's him?" "Too soon to say. But we'll keep west for now, stay off the ridgeline." They ate without hurry but without talk, each of them watching the sky for signs of sun or trouble. When the fire was stamped out and the horses packed, they turned north by a narrow trail that curved along the edge of a dry-cut ravine. The path was steep in places, washed out in others, but Beatrice rode steady, her hands sure at the reins. They didn't speak again until the sun had lifted high enough to warm the backs of their necks. A hawk glided overhead, riding a thermal with its wings tucked close. Below, the land rose and fell in long, quiet waves. Yates broke the silence first. "Did your father teach you to ride?" "No. My aunt did. She was mountain-born, mean as a bear and twice as quick to bite. But she knew horses." Beatrice adjusted the scarf at her throat. "She used to say, 'You ride like you mean it, or you don't ride at all.'" He gave a single nod, his eyes scanning the western ridge. "She's still alive?" "No. Fever took her 2 winters ago." They rode a while longer, letting the horses pick their way across the narrow wash. When the trail widened, Beatrice asked, "What's your friend's name?" "Samuel Tavo. He's Shoshone. I rode with him once when the army came through, looking for someone who didn't want to be found." "You trust him with this?" "I trust he'll see the truth of it." When they reached a stand of juniper near a shallow creek, Yates called out in Shoshone, low and firm. Moments later, a boy stepped from behind a thicket, no more than 12, bow in hand, calm-eyed and still. He looked from Yates to Beatrice, then disappeared again without a word. They waited. Soon Samuel appeared, walking slow and straight-backed, coat patched at the shoulders, rifle slung over one arm. His face was lined with sun, his hair tied back in a leather cord. He stopped a few feet from Yates. "You look worse than the last time," Samuel said. "Still breathing. Lucky woman, if she's riding with you. She chose it." Samuel turned to Beatrice. "That true. I wasn't given many choices before," she said. "But I made this one." He studied her a moment, then gave a slight nod. "There's a line shack west of here. Belongs to my cousin. Empty this time of year. You'll have quiet there." Yates stepped forward. "We'll need a few days. Then we'll move on. You won't get far if he's still hunting you. We'll ride through the Salt River Valley. He won't follow that far." Samuel tilted his head. "You always think that, Yates. Doesn't make it true." "I know." Samuel's gaze lingered on Beatrice again. "You know how to set traps?" "I can learn." He looked satisfied. "Then you'll eat." They rode to the shack by sundown. It was small, one room with a stone hearth and a single cot. Yates cleaned the chimney while Beatrice swept the floor with a bundle of sage. They took turns boiling water and patching the roof where the wind had pried loose some cedar shakes. By the time the fire burned steady inside, her shoulders ached, and her hands were raw, but her heart felt settled in a way she hadn't known since childhood. That night, they shared the cot, side by side, their boots tucked beneath the frame, and the scent of smoke still clinging to their hair. She lay on her side, watching the way the firelight moved across his chest. "You ever think about what you'd do if you weren't drifting?" "I used to," he said. "Then I stopped. Now I'm thinking again." She reached across the space between them and touched his wrist. "What about bees?" His lips lifted a little just at the edge. "I don't know a damn thing about bees." "I can teach you," she said. He turned to face her, their knees brushing beneath the quilt. "Then I'll learn." Outside, the wind moved through the juniper, soft and low. Inside, the fire crackled, and two people who had once lived by running lay still, no longer moving toward anything but each other. By mid-December, the snow came heavy from the west, piling deep against the cabin's walls and muffling the world to a hush. Beatrice woke before dawn most days, slipping from under the quilt to tend the hearth, her breath clouding as she coaxed the coals back to life. Yates always rose a few minutes later, wordless and watchful, setting about his tasks with the quiet steadiness she'd come to rely on. They rationed supplies with care, stretching the beans and flour Samuel had left them, supplementing with what they trapped or foraged. Beatrice had learned to skin rabbits cleanly, to boil pine needles into a sharp, bitter tea that chased off chill and cough. Yates built a lean-to for the horses and carved a handle for her knife after the old one cracked in the cold. They rarely spoke of leaving, though they both knew spring would bring trails too wet to pass and men who might still be looking. But the longer they stayed tucked into the fold of the hills, the more the outside world seemed like something they'd outgrown. One morning, as a storm pressed low and pale outside, Beatrice sat mending a pair of mittens with thread made from rabbit sinew. Yates was at the table, sharpening a hatchet with slow, deliberate strokes. "You ever think about what kind of land you'd want?" she asked, not looking up. Yates paused, then set the blade down. "Flat's easier for planting, but I like to see the edge of things, ridges, draw lines." "What about water?" "Always. A creek, or a spring that runs even when the heat comes." She tied off her stitch. "I think I'd like apple trees." He leaned back, folding his arms. "You planning to grow an orchard?" "If we stay put long enough." His mouth pulled into something almost like a grin, quiet, but real. "You've already decided, haven't you?" She met his eyes, fingers still on the wool. "I have. I'm not going back to drifting." Yates nodded once. "Then we'll make something that holds." The next day he set out early with the mule and came back late, his coat and beard thick with snow, his arms full of rough pine boards. He didn't explain, just set to work building a second cot beside the hearth. Beatrice watched him saw and fit the frame, the lines of his back moving slow and sure. "You think we'll need two?" she asked that night as he hammered the last brace into place. He set down the mallet, brushing sawdust from his hands. "No. But I figure we might need space for more come time." She blinked, then stood from the table, walking to where he stood. "You mean more people?" His hand found hers, callous fingers curling around her palm. "I mean a home. One that grows." They stood close, the fire warming their legs, the cabin filled with the soft tick of snow melting from the rafters. Beatrice laid her other hand against his chest, just above his heart. "I never thought I'd have that," she said. "You do now," he said quietly. "With me." She leaned up and he met her halfway, their kiss slow, steady, like everything between them had been built to lead here. There was no rush, no need to prove it. Just the truth of it held in warmth and breath and the certainty of shared ground. That night, they lay side by side in the new cot, the quilt pulled high, her head tucked beneath his chin. Outside, the wind moved through the trees and the cabin stood solid against it, their fire glowing steady through the dark. By the time spring reached the basin, the trails had turned to mud and the ground softened with new grass. Yates and Beatrice began clearing a patch south of the cabin, pulling stones from the soil and marking where the garden rows would go. Samuel came by once, bringing seed potatoes and a bundle of sage to bless the land. He didn't stay long but left with a quiet nod and a promise to return come summer. Beatrice planted the first row herself, her hands buried in the dirt, her hair pinned back with a bit of carved bone Yates had shaped over winter. He watched from the porch, his shirt sleeves rolled, a splinter in his thumb he didn't bother pulling. That evening they sat together outside, watching the sun slip behind the low hills. The horses grazed near the edge of the creek and the scent of new earth clung to their skin. "You ever think about naming this place?" she asked. He glanced at her. "What would you call it?" She thought for a long moment. "Hearthline." He nodded once. "That'll do." She laid her head against his shoulder and he laced their fingers together. They stayed on that land, built a house with a second room and later a third, planted apple trees along the edge of the creek, traded for bees from a man passing through, and the honey came sweet and slow and golden. They worked side by side through drought and hail and long winters, and they never once left the other behind. Yates carved her a ring from polished antler on their first spring anniversary. She wore it always, even when her hands were blistered from digging fence posts or hauling buckets from the well. When their daughter came 2 years later, she had his eyes and Beatrice's quiet mouth, and her first word was fire. They taught her how to listen to the land, how to ride with sure feet and speak with care. And in the evenings, when the sun dropped behind the cottonwoods and the bees settled into their hives, Yates would wrap his arms around Beatrice on the porch and she'd rest her head against his chest and they'd sit in the long, quiet peace they'd made together. Not a life they'd run to. A life they had built hand by hand, heart by heart, until nothing was left behind but the wind, the trees, and the soft hum of something finally whole.